Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Denise Zaman, the creator of the Berry Cell Value Algorithm. It's a new method for solving a classification problem. In this playlist tutorial, I'm going to share with you all the skills and the fundamentals you need to understand the program with C. Now, I should probably mention the aim was to create this playlist tutorial as a prerequisite learning before the release of the second edition of the Big Bang of Data Science. If you have missed to learn about the Big Bang of Data Science project at the first place, please make sure to visit the website and check the documentation for the first edition and the upcoming second edition. I have mentioned in the introduction of the second edition of the Big Bang of Data Science that I intend to actually embed an AI predictive module on a device. Now, technically speaking, that means we need to program a controller. And the best choice of selecting a programming language that enables us to do so is the use of C programming language. So to make everyone familiar with the syntax of this language, I have decided to create a quick playlist tutorial that get us to understand the language before we actually intend to use it for further details. Let's go ahead and explore the outlines that we shall be learning throughout the episode of this tutorial. First, we're going to be looking at the environment setup, where essentially I will share with you the building package I intend to install first that help me to install some libraries, the IDE, and finally the database as well that we might be using in advanced kind of examples. In the second episode, we'll be looking at the overview about the language. So basically, we'll be learning about the keywords and the identifiers of C language and variables, constants, the data type, and the input and the output concept or overview of C language, the comments, the operators. And finally, I will be sharing with you a lab example. So in every episode, actually, I intend to share a quick lab example that wrap up the outlines that we learned at each episode at that time. In the next episode, I will be talking about the flow control of C programming language. So basically, we will see the syntax of if-else and the for loop, the while loop, break and continue, the switch case as well, go-to statements, and finally, of course, we'll be looking at the lab example to recap these outlines. Next outline or episode, we'll be talking about functions in C programming language. So we'll be looking at the idea of functions from the perspective of C programming language, and then C user-defined functions as well as the functions type. Then we'll be looking at C recursion syntax, and then the storage class, and finally we'll be sharing the lab example to recap these outlines. In the next episode, we'll be talking about arrays with C. So basically, we will understand the concept of arrays from C perspective and the multidimensional array. And finally, we'll be looking at the arrays and function. Now, you could see here, I'm not going to share yet the lab example because in C programming language, you have to understand the tween of array, and that is pointers. That's exactly going to be the next episode, where we're going to first learn about the pointers in C programming language, which is one of the most important and fundamental aspects of the language, actually. And then we'll be looking at the pointers and arrays and their relation, why it's very important to get to understand the difference between them and how both of them actually as a complement for each other. Then we're going to be looking at pointers and functions, as well as the memory allocation. And finally, we're going to be looking at the lab example where we're actually going to bring the arrays and pointers all together. In the next episode, we'll be looking at the strings, idea of strings, how C actually perceives strings, as well as the string functions. And finally, we'll be looking at the lab example. Then in the next episode, we'll be looking at the structure and union using C. So first, we have to understand what is the structure in C, and then the structure in the pointers and their relation to each other, and structs and functions as well, and finally the C unions. And of course, we're going to be looking at the lab example to understand those outlines in practical example. In the next episode, we'll be looking at files, input, and output. In fact, there is only a straightforward lines to speak about only files, input, and output. And that's where we need a practical example to understand the aspect of input and output using C programming language. Last but not least, in the episode of In Depth, I have decided to bring some advanced topics that we can actually utilize this programming language not only to program a controller, but also to utilize it for so many other purposes as well. So we'll be looking at some subjects as enumeration with C and preprocessors, standard libraries of C, and finally lab example perhaps can put all these information together. So by the end, the objectives of this playlist tutorials, as I have mentioned, its main aim at the first place, be able to understand the architecture of C programming language, as well as the elements of C programming language and the syntax and the use of C programming language. And finally, the hands-on labs using C programming language. So as a result of that, you could consider yourself adding the skills of using this language not only for the actually main aim of programming a control, but as well by creating different type of applications using this programming language. I hope the outlines are quite clear to you. Let's go ahead and explore the first episode of this playlist tutorial. I'll see you then.